Hello everyone, and welcome to the Userlist webinar space. Today, our amazing guest is Philipp Wolf, the founder of Custify, the customer success platform for SaaS. There is an amazing audience overlap, and we hope to learn everything about customer success health scores today, customer health scores, especially the trends for the upcoming year. Philipp, welcome. We're excited to have you.
Jane, thank you so much for having me, and welcome everyone to the call.
Before we dive into your slides, could you tell us a bit more, few words about yourself and Custify, what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, I'm the founder of Custify, and Custify is a customer success platform specifically designed for SaaS businesses. Basically, in a nutshell, we help our customers to retain revenue, meaning to reduce the churn, help them figure out upsell, cross-sell opportunities within their customer base. Ultimately, it's all about the net revenue or net revenue retention and avoiding that customers are dropping through the bucket. There's nothing worse than that, as probably everyone knows that is in a subscription-based business, keeping customers is key. And that's what the platform helps our customers with. The main users are customer success managers, customer success teams. However, we also see a lot of founders, product people, or those people that are early on in the earlier startups, typically handling customer success, customer support. So those are also users of the platform.
I'm curious how long have you been out, because I've known those in the company name for ages.
Yes. So actually, we are kind of a more new kid on the block. So we are out since 2017. So when you look at the space, that's rather kind of a new kid on the block there.
And those customer health scores, have they been on your platform from day one as a foundation, or is it a lately added thing?
Yeah, great question. So they have been there from day one. This is also typically the number one thing. So that people ask for when they sign up for a demo, when they look for a customer success platform. Typically, the number one priority of what they want to do with the platform is tracking customer health. This is typically because they realize, well, why do my customers leave? Typically because they're unhealthy, and that's why this customer health scores is indeed one of the key functionalities within the platform. And we have enriched other things later, like for example, surveys, NPS surveys, and CSAT surveys, which is to some sort also a health score if you want. So the customer rates you, which if the customer tells you, well, from 1 to 10, it's 2 likely or 3 likely that I recommend you to a friend. That's probably not that great. But yeah, the concept of the health scores was indeed there from day one.
Fantastic. Well, we are excited to dive into your presentation now. I know you have the slides and the talk about this, so the stage is now yours. Please do share.
Absolutely. Let me just get the share button quickly up and running here. Second, share screen.
In the minute of housekeeping, while Philip is preparing the slides, we will be doing the talk for roughly 20 minutes, and then there will be a Q&A section. So please do use the sidebar in the questions tab to drop your questions. We'll do our best to address them later.
Yes, that would be awesome. If we get some questions from the audience, happy to answer them right after. Now, let's dive into it. So, Jane, I guess the screen is shared now, right? You can see it.
Yes, we can see it great. Stage is all yours.
Awesome. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about these customer health scores. What are they, and why are these health scores more and more important? That's the kind of the scope of the presentation. Let's dive into it. Why do you actually need these customer health scores? So what's the definition of it? So basically, it's a metric that helps you to judge the relationship with a particular customer. So in the end, you do that because you wanna improve your retention. We talked about it earlier. Churn is one of the main reasons why people start tracking these health scores, because they want to understand which of my customers have a problem, which of the customers are likely to churn, and obviously also do something about it. So getting proactive there. So it helps you to kind of understand which of your customer needs your help most. It helps to kind of get customers onboarded more quicker, so getting the customer acquisition done in a shorter time. And I mentioned before, it can also spot upsell opportunities. For example, let's say practical example would be someone is using 5 seats and they have purchased 5 seats. That's likely that they might want to add a 6th seat there. Um, and that's just one example. Or they have a certain feature that they use very, very often, and you could upsell it to another feature that does this specific use case even better. So that's what all these health scores can be used for. If you are coming from a background of a product manager or from a founder's perspective, you can also just name them KPIs. So these health scores can be, you can similarly say KPIs to them. In the customer success terminology, they are named health scores, but in the end, it's just key performance indicators that you have for for each one of your customers. This is how this looks like in our platform. Well, a little bit in the focus, these health scores, but so you have a kind of an imagination how would that actually look like? So I look at the customer and then I see several scores here on the right side, how they are using the platform and what value they get. Now, the question is, or the question that you might ask yourself now, so what are good health scores, or what health scores would I pick for my particular company? And the funny thing is that when we speak to the CSMs in our onboarding process, many of the times we hear, yeah, we want to track how often do people log in. Now, you might ask yourself, is that a good health score? Is login something that I should track, or what other health scores would be there? And it it is actually not a great health score. Why? Because nobody buys your product to log into your platform. That's just like not the reason why they pay you money. That's not the pain that your product solves. So, what are good examples of health scores? So, everything that is tied around the value that you provide, the value that your platform provides, that is why people purchase your product in the first place. That's the sales promise that you give to them. That is why they pay you monthly every time again these invoices. So, emails that your platform sends if you are a platform that sends emails, tasks that are completed if you are a task management platform, or if you manage files, and if this is your key positioning, then yeah, how many files are uploaded. Those are of course just example. The idea here is that um, you want to think about what's the main pain that my product solves, and these health scores, they are typically tied around these examples. That's the most meaningful health scores. Obviously, because if the main reason for churn, besides things that you cannot influence, for example, a business the business ends, or I don't know, they get acquired and they want to use a different platform than yours, and those are things you typically don't have much influence on. But where you can influence is if someone doesn't get the value that was actually promised to them. And that's why these health scores are tied around the value that your product provides. Obviously, that is different for each SaaS company. So a good CS platform like Custify lets you define these health scores very, very flexibly. So you have the chance to basically define them depending on your business and on your use case very, very precisely. Now, you saw there in the previous screenshot that we had a lot of health scores there, and we talked to a lot of founders and customer success managers and product people. And we found out that this is a very good practice to have multiple individual scores easily visible. And these individual scores are typically tied again around the value. And typically, your product doesn't just have one value, it has a main value proposition. However, it has probably several features that help the user to get there. That's why we have these multiple individual scores to understand which of the values that you promised this customer actually gets, and which of the things he might not have yet discovered because it's maybe a different feature or these things. Then not each one of those scores is equally important. So it's important also to say, well, this one is my main KPI, my main health score. It's the main value I provide. And some others like logins. It's good to track the logins. So it's not a health score that you shouldn't have, but it's maybe not the one that you want to weight the highest, because it's just showing you that someone actually interacts with your platform. Obviously, if they never interact, they also never get any of the value. So it's okay to track this as kind of a activity, but it's typically not the most important one. So it's important to weight these one. And it's good to have a final score in the end as well, because that helps you when you look at all your list of customers, your entire portfolio. you get kind of an idea which are your most unhealthy and also your most healthy customers. And then you can still drill down and understand the individual health scores and understand why. So this definition of this global health score is kind of a weighted average of these individual health scores that you have defined for your business. And yeah, as I mentioned, it gives you this overview about the portfolio, and you can of course understand these churn risks early on. All right, Jane, to make this a bit more interactive, if there's any questions in the audience, directly just interrupt me there. I'm happy to directly in context eventually answer them if it makes sense to be handled there. I have the chat open, I just can't read in the same time. So if there's anything, feel free to jump in.
We do have one question, but it's not yet related to what we're talking about, so we can talk about this later.
All right, perfect. Good. So the first steps in order to come up with your health scores and to start measuring them is to think about personas and segments of users and what to measure for them. Practical example is that not each of your plans might have all the features. So certain segments of customers might have actually a different definition of health, because if you have like a starter plan and an advanced plan, and in the advanced plan there is a certain feature that is really important for those guys that have the advanced plan to use it, it would make sense to track this health score for someone on the standard plan, because yeah, well, they don't have access to this feature. So it's important to first understand what's your segmentation within your customer base. And then it could also make sense to think about the segmentation in a different vertical, meaning what is the stage of this customer? So early on in the onboarding, in the adoption phase, you might have very different health scores from a customer that is, let's say, in the renewal phase or in the adoption phase, where other things might be more important. So this segmentation is also reflecting to the stage that the customer is in. So not in all the stages, all things are equally important. Yeah, and then we talked about this also, like what's the weight, how is that distribution, what's the impact of each one of those health scores. That's kind of how you typically start off. I would say the first point is really the most important one. That's typically also something, for example, we do in our onboarding with our customers in workshops. We explain them the best practices and so forth. That's also the most difficult one when you start off, because yeah, there are some industry best practices and things, but you can think of it as a slicing dicing your customers into certain buckets. And these buckets are defined by your plans, by your logic, by your life cycles that the customers have, and then going into each one of those buckets and defining the health score specifically for those. And that logically also means that a customer throughout the lifetime with you might have very different health scores. So they start on the starter plan and they're on the onboarding, then they move to the adoption in your starter plan, and then you upgrade them to your advanced plan. And throughout those stages, the health score definition, like what makes this particular health score customer healthy in this stage, change over the life cycle. Good. Yeah, how do you weight those? So here's an example of how you can actually do that. I can zoom in a bit more to see that better. So you can say how important is that health score, and where do I draw the line? Where do I say this is until here a customer can be considered healthy? So that's something that is, again, very very individual and very much depending on your business and your use case. Coming back to this initial example, let's say you have a product that sends out emails. So is it okay in this case, like they send 50 emails? That's absolutely the best value they can possibly think of. Or where do you draw that line? That's something that you can also, or that you typically fine tune. In Custify, we have something like this distribution that you see there in the bottom, so you can directly understand with this definition that you have here in the screen, where would the majority of my customers be? You see that majority here obviously is in the healthy part, in the green part, but then I can change this definition and would directly see the impact of my changes here, of my expectations, let's say, that I have to my customers, and this definition. So yeah, these health scores also kind of have an impact on your product strategies. So I'm probably you have other tools out there, CRM, support ticketing system, billing solutions. And these tools typically connect with a CS platform like Custify. So we have native integrations in all those, and we get also information from those third-party systems. Why? Because, for example, support engagements, number of open tickets, was there any escalation in the support? Then, has this customer constantly overdue invoices and the billing fails? All those are also indicators in the end for customer health, and they should be individual health scores in your metrics there. And by the way, many support tickets itself do not necessarily indicate that the customer is unhealthy. Typically, actually, is the opposite. Like if a customer is completely silent, that is most likely not the best signal. If they have some support tickets, that's typically good because at least if you can solve them and you don't have escalations there. So yeah, integrating and getting a full picture, not just from your system, but also from third-party systems. And I mentioned this surveys, like for example, an NPS survey, so a survey that you send out, that can also have an influence on the health. So what is the customer actually telling you? So these things are important as well. Now, in customer success departments, typically these health scores are used to basically to be able to proactively get in touch with your customer. That means I see a customer, it drops in health. That means typically early warning for the CS team. You should get in touch. You should understand maybe the champion left the company and nobody knows how to use your platform anymore. Or yeah, they just changed the use case, they changed their product, and they should like really get a new onboarding session with you or a training session. And that is kind of how the teams use this typically. Following up on previous interactions like QBR meetings. Not every one of our customers has this business model of QBR meetings. Depends how high or low touch they are. Sometimes they have a hybrid model where they have, let's say, a starter plan, and these guys, they don't have QBR meetings, and then they have an enterprise plan, and only the guys on the enterprise plan have QBR meetings. But it helps you also to kind of follow up on those. And yeah, providing information for new features, other events, obviously as well. Now, when we talk about, or when we talk to founders, now one of the key metrics besides, I mean, churn in the end has an impact into this, but the key metric that typically also directly relates to the valuation of the company is the net revenue retention. And that's kind of an ultimate figure in a sense of like how well am I able to grow my business with my existing customers. Churn is obviously not good because if customers leave, they stop paying you. So this revenue is lost. Ideally, however, you also not just keep them, but you can also grow them from within your platform, right? So meaning you can upsell them to another plan, they purchase more seats, they purchase an add-on, these kind of things. So basically, they start with you and then they naturally grow with you. And these health scores, as you can imagine, are kind of key because if someone has a lot of value, if someone sees exactly what your product is doing and is a very healthy customer, it's also highly likely that they potentially expand and they add more users to it, or they purchase additional packages. Depends a little bit on your pricing. But that's kind of a key figure for companies and for founders. Yeah, these health scores ultimately help you actually to drive net revenue retention to a healthy figure, whatever that definition is. There's probably a debate out there what is healthy, but at least let's say if you would stop selling to new customers and you still can grow your business, that's already pretty good. Yeah, able to be use multiple tools and data sources. There's also the trend in having kind of an AI trend there in order to be able to have anomaly detection, for example, like this customer behaves similar that those customers that already churned. This is something that we also currently experiment with. The key challenge here is that it doesn't work for all customers. It works for a subset of customers. And for those who are a bit deeper in AI and how this works, there has to be a certain set of data that the AI can train from. Um, let's assume you have only 10 customers and you have also not too many data points for those 10 customers. Then it's obviously very hard for an AI to learn on this data. And there's just one churn customer in a year. Then this is not a great data set to be trained on, versus some other customers, they have maybe thousands of customers and they have naturally a churn of 100 a month or something, where it's super easy for an AI to actually figure out those patterns. But that's also a trend, at least for some of the customers. The customer health scores, they also help you to map out the customer journey more accurately. This journey is what I mentioned before. You can call it journey or life cycle, but these stages that the customer goes through with you, this onboarding, expansion, adoption, and so forth, those are the stages, and the health scores help you with that. And obviously also in the onboarding experience, you can spot early on if a customer doesn't adopt the product as they should. So if you define your health scores in specifically the onboarding, tied towards all the things that the customer should do in the onboarding. They should add a new user, they should explore a certain feature, they should expand a certain feature, and so forth. So typically there's few steps in order for the customer to get the full value of your product. These health scores can really drive it, and you can be proactive with those customers that are not getting to the value as they should. So um, why are those health scores really important? Well, it's probably not a secret that really a lot of SaaS companies use tools like Custify, and that means your competitors are on it. That means there's something that they do that you might not do. And if they are proactive with their customers and if they reduce their churn, I guess that is something that you might want to think about. Um, the customer experience gets so much better. So this is something that we hear all the time from our customers. That means imagine yourself if you are using a product and someone proactively calls you. You have a problem, and then someone reaches out proactively to you. So the phone rings and you get this problem solved. That is just a great user experience. What else? Yeah, they enable you to be a little bit more based on data and processes. So not just judging based on, yeah, let's say gut feelings. And very often of the time, we also see that customers are, um, yeah, typically spending time with the customers that scream the loudest. They spend the most time. However, with the one that really need your help, they might not reach out so often, and they might just like fall through the cracks. And that can also be avoided. Um, to recap quickly, so you can reduce churn, you can help to identify your most successful customers and upsell them and give guidance and provide a better service. So that's kind of in a nutshell what these health scores can do. You can use a tool like Custify. You can start building these health scores out in other tools like yeah, even spreadsheets can do it from the beginning, or you might export this data from your data warehouse. All those are potential options that you can do. Alternatively, in the beginning, you do not have directly to start off with a tool like that, like Custify, but it's important that you basically start measuring these things if you can, if you have this data. And yeah, one of the key things that I also always say when we talk about this, it's important that you track this data early on, that your product starts tracking the data. Even if you don't put it to a platform right now, put it in a data warehouse, talk to your technical team, start tracking these KPIs in your product, because once you have the data, it's also really important for you to, when you decide later to build these health scores, if you have a history of these events that you can use to learn from, that's really, really helpful versus someone that starts from scratch and has first to learn, like, okay, how many times do I actually expect my users to use this functionality? If you have this data already stored, that's really, really helpful. So if there's someone in the audience from a product perspective, um, tracking these key KPIs in a data warehouse or in any other kind of way really, really also helps as early on as possible. Even if you do not look at the data in this very moment, you might find this data very helpful down the road in a couple of months. So yeah,
Fantastic.
that's kind of the end of my slides here. So let's dive into the questions, I guess.
Yeah, as Anthony just dropped a note in the comments, the whole old customer success is common sense, but we need to remind ourselves to do it sometimes. Uh, so one of my first questions before we jump to the audience question is, what are the most typical scenarios on how to act upon health scores once we know they're not great? One thing that comes to mind from our messaging perspective is to trigger behavior-based messaging if certain specific scores, especially individual scores, drop low, so you can offer help or something. On your own, from your standpoint, what are the typically offered measures you can take?
Yes, it depends a little bit on It depends a little bit on the business model. So it depends how high or low touch you are with your customers, right? So if your product is charging $1,000 per month, you probably are much more high touch than someone who charges $29 a month. So it depends a little bit. Do you have more automatics in place, automations, sending messages and so forth, like you said, or do you create a task for the CSM to immediately call this customer because you're more higher touch? Or do you a hybrid approach in a sense of you have some people that are getting these automated messages versus someone who yeah, might get a call. So that all of those are potential things. The important thing is that you get proactive with them. The channel is, I guess, depending on the business model, and even not that important. But the importance is that the customer understands that someone is monitoring and understanding that they have a problem.
Very cool. We do have quite a few questions. I'm thinking how we should go about them. Let's go from the first. So it's a bit of a business puzzle though. So from Carson, we are a B2B company in the e-learning sector and have around 300 customers. The churn quote is around 3%. So we don't have much data why customers leave. How would you build a valid, objective customer health score in this situation?
Yeah, this pretty much goes down to my recommendation in the very end. So data is really important. That means if you have the chance to start tracking these e-learning, means most likely someone logs in, someone does a course, someone finishes a course, someone has a test in the end of a course. So all those are potentially things. And if you can start logging these things somewhere, like this customer just finished this course, this customer just started the course, but they never finished it, or these guys, they always go only until section 2 and they leave out all the other sections. These would be important data to understand where is the problem. So building a health score when you don't have any data is really, really hard or close to impossible. So you need to start tracking these things in the product to be able to have a meaningful health score there. So the recommendation would be, if possible, talk to your product people, or if you're the product person itself, get this on the roadmap as quickly as possible to start tracking these key metrics. So in the e-learning, I can imagine it's typically tied around the platform itself. How many people take these courses? How far do they get? Do they have a quiz in the end? Do they complete the quiz? With what results? Those are all things that your customers look for when they purchase the platform. And the churn of 3%, I'm guessing that's monthly churn. If it would be yearly churn, it would be a great number. That's something you can certainly impact if you have the chance to talk to those guys early on. If you figure out they are not taking the courses or they are not adopting it as they should, to offer them training session, for example.
Yeah, if you don't have much data, why they leave? Get that data. That's like basically
Yeah,
any
data
the
is key.
generic customer
Yes.
success advice.
Yeah.
And I've recently come across, this is somewhat a tangent, uh, information about info products and learning products,
Mhm.
that it largely depends on how well you filter the incoming people, how qualified they are to take the course. And you can use this to allow as many or as little unqualified people as you want. And it's okay to filter them really hard. This way you will have amazing metrics inside, but most likely you will remain a niche, very small volume business. And if you want to go large, like Coursera, I don't know, any other big course platform, you will need worse metrics but more customers in order to gain traction. Unfortunately, that's like the reality of info products and educational products these days.
Right.
Just a sentiment that really makes me sad, but it is unfortunately close to truth.
I mean, churn. The thing about churn is this: it's a very complicated metric because there's not the answer. Most of the times, at least. Why is my churn high? It's typically there's not the answer that you can give. The churn can have many reasons. One of the reasons that goes into what you just said is I'm attracting the wrong customers. So I'm simply the customers, what they want to do is not what I can offer. So it's simply there's a mismatch between what they think they can do and what they can actually do. Obviously, they will leave. So that's very early in the funnel. So your marketing positioning is not precise enough, or your sales team is selling to the wrong customers because they make them wrong promises. That is a reason for churn. Or your onboarding experience is not good, so they don't get to the value. That's kind of a bit later in the funnel, right? So people buy your product, but they don't get the value, and they don't get the value soon enough before they actually say, well, sorry, I don't understand. So churn typically has is a tricky thing, because and typically, to be honest, it's a combination of those, right? So it's not just the reason, it's typically a combination of reasons why people churn. Maybe for Karsten and this question, what he could do, and this, instead of doing the health scores in this situation, is starting doing exit interviews. So this is something I always recommend doing for people doing. And it doesn't matter if you are in a low touch or high touch business, you can always do it. If it's a more low touch business, you just sample your customers and you don't have it with everyone. Try to get them talking to you when they want to leave or when they left already, and try to get them on the phone. I'm not talking about the survey that you send them. Get them on the phone, speak to a human, talk to them. Um, and understand why they churn. That also helps you to kind of understand, do you have a problem in the product? And if they tell you, yeah, for example, we never figured out how this and that works, that means, okay, from a tracking perspective, you might want to focus your product team in saying, hey, track this specific functionality really, really exactly, so we see who's using it properly or not. So these exit interviews can also like help you to understand what are the health score that I should actually define for my product. But in the end, typically it goes is tied around the question, what value do you provide, and what's the key positioning of your product. So for this e-learning solution, it's definitely that someone goes there and learns something, and ideally gets a certificate or completes the course. That's why they pay the money there. That's why, to consume the content.
Also, it might be that we're just fantasizing here because we don't know much, but it might be that the ultimate end user is not the customer of this, because otherwise it probably would be a subscription with much higher churn rate than 3%. It's most like an enterprise client, and you have entirely different objectives there, and that would lead to
Yes.
different health scores.
Good.
Either way,
Could
let's
be.
jump to the next one. From Jeff, what is your opinion on attaching and running playbooks automated on an alert slash threshold value of a global health score? Thank you. I imagine playbooks with a capital P is like a term from your software, or is it not?
No, yeah, not really. We also call them that, but it's also like health scores, I would say. It's kind of a industry definition. A playbook is an automation, so something that you would run
Mm-hmm.
in a marketing team would run a playbook after someone subscribed to your newsletter. So sending them your newsletter is more or less a playbook, right? And in customer success terms, this playbook typically can be either emails or messages or tasks that you create. And the question was to send directly something to the customer if the health score is low, or
Um, Basically, global health score, you get
mhm.
an alert related to
Yeah.
that, and what do you do?
Yes. So the answer is here. It depends, as I mentioned before, your your audience, on your customers. Sometimes it can make sense to send them a message first and see what happens, and then if the situation is not improving, to schedule a task for the CSM to get in touch. Kind of a hybrid approach that makes sense a lot of times. So first, trying to solve certain things automatically before you involve a human that calls, because obviously that last part significantly more expensive than an email that you can send. And you might find out that 50% of these cases can be solved with an email. For example, hey, here's a link to our knowledge base, or have you considered this article that could help you to understand this better? Or here's a video that explains how this works. If the reason is, for example, they don't use a feature. The playbook that is tied around this global health score, sending messages to customer, is most likely not a good idea. Why? Because what do you say in this message? Like, this global health score is typically compiled out of multiple things. And the message that you send to your customer would be like, I see you're not happy. What can we do? Right. So it's not very specific. while a playbook that is tied to an individual health score, for example, a certain feature that they are not using or a bad NPS score that they gave you, that can be directly tied to a very concrete message and a concrete action. Like, okay, I see you don't use this feature. I have here a knowledge bars article for you. And if you have questions, I have here a Calendly link for my product team that can schedule a 15 minutes walkthrough with you, or these kind of things. So you can get more concrete. This global health score thing is typically more of a portfolio view, more of a, I'm looking at a glance at a couple of customers, and I'm going to identify those that really need my help. And then I need to dig deeper anyway to understand what parts are unhealthy, what are the things that drive down this health score, and then derive the action. So if there's a playbook on the global health score, it's most likely better situated in a sense of an alert and hands up for the CSM. Hey, there seems to be a problem, and then the CSM typically decides how to handle it individually, case by case.
Next question from Carson again. If you have multiple products in a portfolio, what's good practice from your side building customer health scores without having high complexity? The scores are not comparable in this case.
Yes, that is indeed correct. The scores are not comparable in this case. What we typically recommend doing in such a case is that you have scores tied around this specific product. So each product has different scores, or a score. Depends how complex are those products, how granular you want to get with your tracking. But most likely it would be multiple scores per product. And then it depends. Can a customer have one product and it's either this one or another one, or can they have multiple products at a time? Can they have product A, B, and C? With the segmentation that we talked about, where you slice and dice your customers, and depending on which segment they belong to, they get certain health scores, that would exactly tie into that situation as well. Meaning, if I have product A, I'm not going to track product B and C. But you will have to define this health score per product, because you cannot define them just like for all products, except login that you could eventually define for all products. But as soon as it comes to the individual value proposition of the product, it's going to be also different health scores and different definitions of those.
Yeah, we have this question a lot at Userlist, not about health scores, but about like, should I have, let's say there are companies who have different little tools in the Shopify ecosystem, for example, or something, and they're relatively simple, but there's a bunch of them. And then, yes, it definitely makes sense to run them within the same user list or Custify account and somehow manage them all.
Yes.
But if these are relatively complex, maybe it makes sense to have separate accounts for them and manage them as separate series of products.
Yes. So the rule of thumb, I would guess, is if the same customer success team takes care of all the products, it most likely makes sense to handle all the products in one platform. If this is almost like different companies and you have separate teams handling different products, then yes, it might make sense to have them in separate instances, let's say.
Yep. Alex is asking, relating to Carson's question, if launching a beta health score, what are the top 3 to 5 metrics to track from day one? Oh my goodness, that's of course specific to the business.
Yes, that's exactly very specific to your value proposition.
Any like key methods of identifying those few success metrics?
Yes, of course. There's like categories like engagements, like how engaged are people, like how often do they go in, how often do they use certain functionalities, and so forth. Value, how much value does someone get? Do they really get the value, or do they just like click around and they don't really get the value? Like if you provide a dashboard solution, do they have a dashboard, or do they have like really in-depth dashboards with a lot of small widgets and things that you really get value from? It's a different thing. Can be engagement, can be that, can be customer feedback, can be these NPS scores, can be tied to support, can be tied to how happy are they with the support. Like, do you get CSAT for your support questions? Most of the support will track this almost automatically, so it's just a setting. So after each touch point that the customer had, they can rate your support experience. So that is another one. So those are kind of the categories that they would fall into, that you can look into.
Okay, another question from Timo. hope I pronounced the name right. We are a two-sided B2B marketplace, so the value comes from two businesses successfully making a deal with each other. Are there
Yeah.
any two-sided marketplace specific indicators that can be used for creating customer health score?
Yes, we have also some customers exactly in that space in providing a marketplace where two or more parties come together, and only if both get value, the marketplace is successful. And the first question is like, who pays the bill, right? So that's kind of thing that you want to think about. So is that something that both like tie into and both kind of pay the bills, or is there a B2B side where they pay you the platform fee, and there's a B2C side where they only get the value? Then you obviously want to focus first on the B2B side to make sure that these guys actually get the value. Um, Nevertheless, also not neglecting the other part. So doesn't, it's not only tied around who pays the bills, but that defines of, let's say, or that um, defines your criteria on how to define those health scores. So you want to think about, I guess, on both sides. What does this particular side of the marketplace, what does it mean to be successful for each one of them, right? And your health score is tied around what makes these parties successful with your platform that you provide. And most likely it will be very different things. Like there's a provider that provides a product, and then there's a buyer that buys the product. And for the buyer, the experience of the purchasing is very important. While for the other one, the most important thing is that they generate revenue, that the positioning right, that they are found when people search for it, and so forth. So those would be other criteria for each individual party.
How do you, that's a question for me. There are tools that are more like autopilot, set and forget, I don't know, website, uh, uptime, monitoring. How do you do health scores for that?
Yeah, it's a very good question that we obviously get also a lot from our customers in the earlier stage. I would say it's not a set and forget kind of thing. Why? Um, First of all, you like when you start off, you have certain assumptions that you have on health of customers, so you define them, and you most likely your assumptions get once you look at the data get at least altered a little bit, or you have some new learnings there. That means your definition changes, or you find out that you want to track additional things. So not all the health scores are so meaningful. So you want to like remove some of those. So you look at churn customers, you understand their usage and their behavior, and then you might figure out that other things are more important. So there's a learning curve in that on one side, and on the other one is that most businesses and products evolve over time. They are not static things. So and as these health scores are very much tied around your product, also those health scores have to evolve. Simple example, you add a new feature, and this feature is quite important for upsells and things that you identify for successful customers. And you haven't tracked it so far as a health score, but once you add this feature in your product, you might want to also start tracking it with a health score. So I would say, while in the beginning, of course, you have a little bit more hands-on work to fine-tune them, to define them, and to have some learnings. Later on, they still involve because you involve as a company and as a service that you provide.
Another question, and of course, it's amazing to have a tool like Custify in place to, address this problem professionally. But is there any automation recipe that you could use, with no-code tools or something to hack together your own customer health score evaluation?
I would say, not to my knowledge. As I mentioned before, the most important part is to track the data, and that's something your technical team can probably decide best, because they know what kind of infrastructure they have in place, what's the technology stack that your product is built on. Do you have already a data warehouse? Can you just log it somewhere into a certain database? There are multiple ways to do that. And the product team is the one that would probably have the best answer to that question, depending on the use case.
Mhm. What are your favorite resources? I don't know, blogs, podcasts, books when it comes to health scores? or
Well,
customer
I
success
think
in general would be probably the more
yes,
correct
yes.
question.
So I would say there's probably something also on our blog, but I would say it's really good to talk to someone from the industry who has a lot of experience, who did that already with other platforms, who can help you kind of kickstart this the health course, and yeah, someone who has spoken to other SaaS companies, who has implemented this, is probably the best way. Although there's probably tons of articles out there, as we saw in this talk, it's really specific to your business. There is not the answer for the health score that makes sense for you. It's really something that also in our case, when we onboard our customers, we individually work with them, we look at their product, we analyze their use cases, and then we derive what are the health scores that make the most sense for them. So this is there's unfortunately not the holy grail, but there's certainly also things that you can find. For example, on our blog, there's an entire guide on health scores that helps you to kind of get a good overview about it. And if you want to get started, that's eventually something to have a look at.
Yeah, we'll be generating a recap blog post, and we'll surely link to that guide and to other resources on hand. One last question before we wrap up. What's the typical stage when a SaaS company needs to worry about automating customer health scores? And because of course, the early time you're kind of operating on your gut feeling more than numbers. So when is that water line between automated and manual?
Starting tracking as early as you can. Okay, so even if you, I mean, product market fit is anyway is a word that everybody defines somewhat different. So it's a bit hard to kind of say when you have product market fit. Anyway, like when you have customers that pay you, you should start tracking these things. You should log them somewhere, and you should start tracking them. And automating that can still be done in a later stage. That makes only sense, or if you have a certain scale, if you have if you're in a scale situation, let's say, when you build first teams that handle customers, when you have onboarding teams, when you have retention teams, when you have a customer success teams. But start tracking them as really as early as you can. Like this is what I would definitely recommend everyone, because once you have when you have the data, you can do beautiful things with it. If you don't have the data, it's more or less guesswork that you have to do.
Yeah. There's one common denominator we have in our businesses. It's the customer behavior data, and getting it right means a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Philip, for joining us today, sharing your wisdom. And as we mentioned before, the recap will be published, and we will also publish the video itself shortly. So stay tuned and have a wonderful, productive 2022.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great 2022. Cheers.
Thank you, Philip. Bye.
Bye bye.